So the first thing that we need to do is we need to ganache the cake. So I've already filled and stacked the sponges, and what I'm going to do now is actually show you how to ganache them. I prefer to use ganache. I find that it's a lot more forgiving than buttercream. And it also helps you achieve the sharp edges, which is exactly what I want to show you today. So I've already made the ganache up because it needs to come to room temperature. Then consistency you're looking for is like sort of peanut butter. So the recipe for the ganache is available on the website. Okay, now what you need to do is I've put a ganaching plate on top. And this enables you to get a sharp edge from the top to the bottom. So when you're using your scraper, what you do is you can see there's a gap going all the way round, and that gives you a nice straight sharp edge and like a nice structure for your icing to go on. So I'm going to start by using a palette knife, and I'm going to start spreading the ganache. Make sure that your ganaching plate is in the center, and you start from the top. And the reason that I start from the top is because you want to hold that plate in place. So you just keep going round and just squeezing it in. And the nice thing about using a plate also is you can actually see it on the top, so you can make sure that you've squeezed it in and that there's no air pockets or gaps, because the better that you have your ganache, the easier it's going to be for you to cover it in your sugar paste. So that's the top done. And be generous. Don't worry about being generous with the ganache, because you're going to scrape it off anyway. The main thing is to get a good layer all the way round. And now we're just going to go around the bottom. It's a bit messy, as you can see. It will go everywhere. So all the way, and then make sure it's all covered. If at any time when you're covering this, you find that you've got a little bit of sponge sticking out, just get a knife and just cut that off. You don't want any sponge sticking out, because that will obviously affect your straight wall of ganache, which ultimately will affect your sugar paste. So just stop and just scrape a bit off. But again, that's why I prefer ganache to buttercream, because if you have any problems, any bits sticking out, I find that if you then try and scrape it off, any crumbs of cake can kind of pull out the buttercream. Whereas with ganache, you can simply add to it, and if it's too bulky, I find that if you use something like this, a stainless steel scraper, you can actually heat this up in hot water, and you can pull this along, and it can just melt it further and further until it's nice and smooth again. I just think it's a lot more forgiving. Okay, so I've now got ganache all the way around the cake. And don't worry about if it's not tidy and clean, because all you need to do at the moment is just make sure it's round generously. And then what you're going to do is you're going to take your scraper and just make sure that your hand is nice and secure on the top. And you're just going to scrape all the way round with your ganache. Just pop it in the any excess in the bowl and keep scraping. And then you will find that you'll need a couple of goes at this. So you get your first layer on like now. And then you need to pop that in the fridge. And then once you've done your first layer and it's firmed up, we can then add to it, because you'll always have in the middle, you'll have your gaps. So then we'll add to that. But that's literally your first layer done. It's very simple. Just scrape around and until it's all smooth. So it doesn't need long in the fridge. Ganache sets really, really quickly. So I'm just going to pop this in the fridge for about 2 to 3 minutes. And then once it's set firm, we're going to come back and do the second layer. So the cake has been in the fridge now for about 2 to 3 minutes. And you can't over chill it, so don't worry if you've left it in there for a little bit longer. But basically what you're looking for is you want to be able to touch this now and it's nice and firm. Okay, so what we're going to do next is we're going to now put the final layer on where we fill all the gaps in the middle. I just want to show you actually the consistency of the ganache because I didn't before, and this kind of shows you it basically needs to be like peanut butter. So final bit then, same again, don't worry about being generous because you're going to scrape it off anyway. So you just want to put it all the way around. There's not really any specific technique here. Doesn't need to be any particular order. But you just need to make sure that as you go around, you're filling all the holes like this. There we go. I reckon we're about there. Maybe one there. Right, so now that I've covered it, I would say, yeah, I'm pretty happy with that actually. I've got a gap there. Just make sure you look and make sure you haven't got any gaps anywhere. Okay, so same again. Take your scraper and you just want to scrape. At this point, you don't necessarily have to hold on to it here because I find if you're holding here, it's when your turntable's moving, it makes it a bit difficult. It's actually easier, and this is why it gets easier as you go along, to actually just use your turntable. That's what it's there for. So hold it in place and use your turntable as you're scraping along. Just keep going round and round and round. My cake's sliding all over the place. There we go. Let's pop it back in the center and just keep going round and round and round. And what you want, I'm actually going to hold it. Can you see how smooth that looks? So that's what you're looking for. You want a nice smooth consistency all the way around. And if at this point you still have the odd hole, the odd gap, just fill it. You don't need to pop it back in the fridge, just fill it. I'll see once I've scraped if I have any holes at the end. Just take it off the top so you can see. So as you can see, there is a couple of holes here. So I'm just going to fill them with a bit more ganache. Now, obviously, you are going to be putting sugar paste on this. So it's all going to be covered anyway. And little holes like that probably would be, you know, covered by the sugar paste. But I just think it's good practice to get your foundation right. And if you can get your ganache perfect, you know that you stand a good chance of getting your sugar paste good as well. So where I've just covered that, just go around again. And I think we're about there. Yeah. Just make sure. So I'll just move that so you can see it in a nice position. And there you have it. So the next thing we're going to do is we're just going to do the top. But before we do that, we just need to chill this down again. The cake is already quite cold from the first time I put it in the fridge. So we're just going to pop it in a couple of minutes and then we're going to do the top. So this has now been in the fridge for a couple of minutes. And as you can see, it's firmed up nicely. So the final part is the top. Now, to do this, we need to take off the ganaching plate. You might find that as you've done it and as it's sort of shrunk ever so slightly as it's chilled, that actually the plate is already loose. If not, just take a sharp knife and just, if I get it in, here we go. Just gently, there we go, just run the knife through. Now, just make sure that you don't take off big chunks of ganache with you. It's not the end of the world if you do, and I'll show you why. So, for example, can you see I've got a bit of loose ganache there? I'm just going to take that off. So, with your last remaining bit of ganache, just make sure it's nice and smooth. And what you do is you generously just pile a dollop onto it on the top like that. And I say generously because we actually need it to splurge over the edges. So then what you do is you just, from the middle, just move it out to the edge. Now I've actually got a lump in there. I'm just going to get rid of that. Every so often, as your ganache begins to set in the bowl, you sometimes get a little lump. Now we don't want that because when we come to do any scraping, we'll pull a big chunk out. So I'm just going to get rid of that. Make sure it's nice and smooth. And then just let it go over the edge like this. Okay. And then you just need a piece of greaseproof paper. And I'm going to put this on here, but what I want is I want to have as minimal air bubbles as possible. So as I put it on, I'm just going to smooth it on a bit at a time. And by having a generous amount of ganache on there, that helps get rid of the air bubbles, because it can just squidge all along, smoothing out any gaps. So you can probably see that on the camera, that there's hopefully no air bubbles on there. Okay. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to flip the whole thing upside down. So you just take a board, any particular board will do, as long as it's bigger than the cake you're working on. And then, this is the tricky bit, but it's absolutely fine. You just have to concentrate on what you're doing. So you take your board, pop it on, and then flip the whole thing upside down, take that off, and put it back on your turntable. So now we have an upside down cake. So what we're going to do is we're going to just scrape off the excess. But another reason why I said be generous, so you have this excess, is because if earlier, like I said, where you have a little bit of ganache that might break off the top, this is just going to fill it. So it makes it very easy. So all you do is you just go around and then take that away. And then just get rid of that. And that's it. Just round and round. And then now you'll have a nice flat top. And obviously this bit here is going to be the top of your cake, and this is where you want your sharp edges. So for your sugar paste, and if you have a sharp edge with your ganache, you've got a good chance of having a good sharp edge with your sugar paste. So again, we're going to pop that in the fridge final time for a minute or two just to set, and then we're going to flip it back over again, and it will pretty much be finished. So this has been in the fridge for a couple of minutes, and it's now set completely. So as I said, we're now going to flip the whole thing back again. So I've actually just picked it up here on the board that it's on. Make sure you've got your hand on it so you don't drop it. And turn it over. And then you can pop that back on there, it doesn't really matter. But the main thing is you want to get your cake back on the board like that. Now, because this is now cold, I can actually peel this off. So I'm just going to peel the top off, and actually I'm really happy with that because there are no air bubbles. It's nice and smooth. If you did have any air bubbles, it's very simple. All you would do is just get your palette knife and just touch them up. The cake's nice and cold, it'll set really quickly. But no, that's really good. Nice sharp edge and nice and smooth. With your ganaching plate, which I didn't mention in the beginning, what I've done, this is a 6-inch cake because the cake that we're making is a 6, 8 and 10. So I've used a 6-inch ganaching plate and a 6-inch board. The reason I do it like that is because what I then do, if you think about when it was actually on the cake like that, I actually trim the sponge. So you've actually got roughly about 1/2 mil gap between the sponge and the edge of the plate and the board. And then, I mean, you can trim a bit more if you want, but obviously the more you trim, the more ganache you're going to have to use. Now that we've got our perfectly ganached cake, the next stage is to cover it in sugar paste. Now, you need to knead your sugar paste until it's pliable. The more you knead it, the more easier it is to work with. So it's really important that you just keep it nice and pliable and nice and warm. So this also prevents things like the elephant skin. You know, you get that kind of cracking in the elephant skin, which is quite common when people cover cakes. The best chance you've got of getting a really smooth cake is by the kneading of the icing until it's lovely and pliable like this and really soft and bouncy. Okay, I've already kneaded this for quite a while. It depends on how much sugar paste you're using, but I mean, I've got about roughly 750 grams here, and I probably knead that for maybe 3 to 4 minutes. Okay, just put some icing sugar on my work surface just to stop it from sticking. And what these are spacers. They're really, really good to use if you're not confident with rolling out, because what they do is they provide an even icing as you're rolling. So we just pop them either side, then we take our rolling pin and just roll out, and you can see how quickly and how smoothly that rolls. And that is because I've kneaded the satina sugar paste really well until it's nice and warm. And then what you do is you just keep turning it. So I'm rolling it, and then I'm turning it. Just make sure you keep plenty of ice and sugar underneath. Put your spacers in position and roll again. I think we'll do one final roll. So we'll just turn that again. Again, make sure you got all your ice and sugar underneath so it doesn't stick. And now, that should be just the right thickness. I think these are 5 ml, which is a nice thickness for your cake. Right. Just a little tip for you. When it comes to covering your cake with a ganached cake, well, with any cake, but certainly with a ganached cake, is this cake is actually now at room temperature. If you decide to cover your cake when it's cold, what you'll find is when you put your sugar paste on top of the cake, because it's cold and suddenly it's becoming warm in a warm room, it actually creates a bit of condensation. So you have this layer of condensation between the cake and the sugar paste. And then you'll find that as you're trying to smooth it, it's quite clammy because of the condensation. So it's always best and it's always easiest if you have your cake at room temperature, which of course is a lot better for ganache because ganache works really well at room temperature. So this is actually a sugar syrup. What I'm going to brush all over the cake. Sugar syrup is really easy to make. It's literally just 1 part water to 1 part sugar. So say 50 mils of water to 50 grams of sugar. And you just put it in a pan and put it on the hob. And then you just boil it. Don't boil it like a caramel, but just, heat it up so it's slightly bubbling. And then leave it to cool. And it keeps in the fridge for a couple of weeks. And it's a really, really good glue for covering your cake. So I'm just brushing that all over the surface of the cake, all the way around. You don't want to put too much on because you don't want a puddle at the bottom. But if you just make sure you put enough on to cover the whole surface. Now we're going to put the sugar paste onto the cake. So you have it to the side. This is how I find it easiest. And then I take my rolling pin and I literally just flip it over like that. And then I bring my cake into the center rather than dragging everything over. One thing you don't want to do is you don't want to drag your sugar paste. Okay, so try and keep that in position. Bring your cake into the center. And then all you do is just make sure that you've got enough hanging over. And then you just roll it over like that. So now we're going to actually smooth the whole thing over. There's 2 stages to this. There's the basic smooth, like the rough smooth if you like, followed by the final flawless smooth. In order not to get that kind of elephant skin and cracking which happens around the edge, what tends to cause that is, first of all, it's not kneading your sugar paste, so it's not pliable. But it's also obviously the weight of the sugar paste at this point. So it's important that the first thing we do is we just smooth on the edges. Rather than going round and round and round all the way, start off with the top all the way round. So we're just going to smooth just the top bit here, just so we don't have any weight tearing it, so we know that that's secure. Okay, the next thing is we're just going to press all the way round. And remember not to pull it down, not to push like this, because if you're pulling it, that's when you're going to get a tear. So just press it, and then so you don't get the overlaps like fabric. You just need to keep pulling it out like that, and then sticking it back in again all the way around. So you just pull it out, stick it back in. The smaller the cake, the harder actually it is to cover because you've got more of a curve, so you get more gathering of sugar paste. So that, as I said, just pull it out and then smooth it on like that. So that is your first part, to make sure that the surface of the cake is completely covered with sugar paste. Just use your hands at this stage just to sort of make sure it's all on there and covered. Okay, that's the rough cover. And then what I do is I take a knife and I get rid of the excess. It's important to note at this point that I don't want to cut it right up to the edge. We actually need to leave a little edge of sugar paste. So I would say probably about 1 centimetre. So I'm actually cutting with a 1 centimetre excess edge all the way around. And then we just get rid of that. Now, there's 2 ways I like to achieve a sharp edge on a cake. And actually, I like both of them, but which method I choose often depends on the size of the cake. Because one method, which I'm going to show you, involves tipping the cake upside down. Now, if you're obviously doing a huge 16-inch cake, that's quite heavy. So I'm going to show you both methods. Now, you need a turntable for this section. Now, I'm just going to pop that on there. You can pick it up at this stage. It doesn't matter about fingerprints because we haven't started the smoothing yet. So at the moment, we've just used our hands. Now we're going to start using some tools to get that real flawless finish. So a simple scraper, and we just put that on, just smooth it round, and that is just to start getting a nice smooth look to the sugar paste on the top, and then round like that. Just making sure it's all nicely stuck on and you've got rid of any air bubbles. If you do have any air bubbles, I actually haven't got any on here, but don't worry if you do get any air bubbles. All you need to do is just get like a little sterilised needle or a scriber or something, and just pop it in, make a hole, and then just press the air out and then just smooth it over again. So this is what I call my rough smooth. So it's the first stage of smoothing, but it still looks quite rough. So I'm going to show you how I use the flexi smoothers. Now, what you do is you can see that you have a curved edge on one and a straight edge on the other. And the idea is you use the curved edge to smooth up and down and around the side of the cake and following the line of the curb to get that sharp edge. And then what I also do is I use the straight edge here to the right height of the cake, and I actually push from the middle. I push the sugar paste out, and you can probably see there that actually you sometimes get an X. I allow that and I just cut it off like that. So again, same again, if you get a bit of excess, so you're smoothing along and then you get rid of that excess like that. And as you can see, you're starting to get a really, really sharp edge all the way around like that. So that's your first way of getting a sharp edge, is using these. So just to quickly recap, use the straight edge along there to smooth it along, or use the curved edge around there to go around like that. And I tend to mix it up and use both as I'm going along. So that's the first way of doing it. The second way involves flipping the cake upside down. As I said, I do find this a bit easier, but it's not so easy if the cake's really big and heavy. So another piece of greaseproof paper, pop it on the top of the cake, and then you get a board. Any board will do, as long as it's a smooth board. You don't want any pattern or roughness on this because it's going to go on the top of the cake. Just place that on, and then again you're going to flip the whole thing upside down. Take your turntable off. Now this is why I said to have about a centimetre edge, and it's because this will actually drop down naturally by gravity, because what we're going to do is we're actually going to push now, this is the second method, push the sugar paste down. So take your smoother, and it's got a flat edge. Make sure the flat edge is facing down. It's a little bit noisy this, but I'll just demonstrate. And what you're doing is you're basically going down and smoothing, and you're closing the gap between the cake, the sugar paste on the cake and the board. So it's like this. So you're going round and round and round. As I said, it's quite noisy. Now, occasionally you might catch it because it's a sharp edge where you've angled it a little bit wrong. You see there, I've just caught it. It's absolutely fine. Doesn't matter if as you're going around to get a few flat bits there where you've caught it. And once I've gone all the way around, I'll explain why. See, I've done it again, so that's fine. So we go all the way around. And then what you've done, again, very roughly, is you've closed the gap. So the next thing to do is to tidy that up, is to use these again, because I find these are really, really good for even this method as well. Because as you smooth it like that, they act as a really sharp knife. So they actually cut any excess off like that. And really use pressure and really push in round and round the cake. They're almost like sandpaper. They work really, really well at smoothing out any imperfection. All the way around the bottom. So you can see now that the cake and that the sugar paste is flush to the bottom, to the greaseproof paper. So we've got a closed gap, so we know when we flip the cake over again, we're going to have a really sharp edge. And then we're just going to go up the top a little bit and just smooth the rest of it out. Now, if I'd cut this flush earlier and not left this excess, it would have all dropped down, then you would have had a gap. So you do need that excess because you need to allow to push it down. So now, once you're happy with it and you've smoothed it all the way around with your smoother, okay, we're now going to get rid of this excess. So you just take a sharp knife and you just want to cut it all the way around. Get rid of that. And there we go. I'll just get rid of that bit there. And then we're going to turn it back over. So same again, pick it up. Make sure you got hold of it. Flip it over. Take the board off. Put the board down because you can pop it back on there. And then take that off. And then we're going to work with the bottom, but you can see the top. You now have a nice sharp edge. So I kind of mix between the two, my smoother and my flexi smoothers. And I just now want to just tidy up the bottom. So we just go around like that. And then once we've done it with that one, sometimes I put it up that way as well, so you've got a flat surface on the whole height of the cake. Finally, smoothers just to finish it off at the bottom, closing the gap again, so you've got a nice straight edge when you pop it on the other cake. And that, I mean, you keep going until you're happy, basically, but I'm pretty happy with that. I think it looks nice and smooth. Yeah, okay. So that is your flawless finished cake. And what we're going to do now is we're going to put it onto the other two tiers. I've already done the other two tiers. I've already stacked them, obviously because we've prepared in advance for the tutorial. So now obviously if this was a real cake, I would be putting dowels in this at this point, but this is actually a dummy tier. So no need to put dowels in. But what I am going to need to do is obviously glue it on. I've actually got some excess ganache left over from earlier. You can use royal icing. Some people use edible glue. Some people use sugar syrup. Ganache and royal icing are the strongest glues I find for this, for sticking the cake on. So just a little bit on the top, like so. And then, now just one thing to bear in mind, obviously I'm going to pick this cake up and pop it on. This cake is still really soft because I've only just covered it. In reality, if you weren't doing it in a tutorial form, I would say you need to leave this overnight, because if you leave this overnight, it creates a skin and it firms up. Then you can literally pick it up and pop it on without pressing your fingers into it. Now, as I said, I've only just made this, so I am going to have to pick it up. So I'm just going to try and do it really gently, try and smooth out any of my fingerprints, and then you just pop it on like that, and then you can actually just move it into position. There we have it. So that is your 3-tiered stacked cake with nice sharp edges, which is a really, really good base ready for the decoration.